The Hero's Journey, a Mindful Accord podcast, with your host, Rich Decker.
Hello, and thank you for taking some of your valuable time to listen to the show. If you enjoy this show and have been inspired by this episode or another episode, I would encourage you to join our Patreon page. For those who are unfamiliar with Patreon, it's a platform that allows artists and content creators to build relationships with their audience, while at the same time earning enough money to keep providing the content. When you join our community, you will gain access to exclusive content such as live guest Q&As, behind the scenes, and other exclusive offers. And you can join for as little as $1 per month. There's a link in the show notes that'll take you directly to our page. My guest for this episode is Angela Howell. Angela is a coach, speaker, artist, and author of the best-selling book, Finding the Gift: Daily Meditations for Mindfulness. Through her journey, Angela has faced many traumas and difficulties. Some of her challenges include being molested at 8 years old, physical assaults, being involved in an armed robbery of a pharmacy, and then a dog attack that nearly killed her, all the while managing years of chronic pain. She is here to share the wisdom she has gained from her journey. What you will discover that deep in her heart, she believes that everything that has happened to her is for her good. This is the hero's journey of Angela Howell. Well, thank you, Angela. Thank you for joining us on the Hero's Journey, a Mindful Accord podcast. I'm very excited to hear your story. There's a lot of acts in your story, a lot of act twos where the protagonist or the hero encounters challenges, and you've had your fair share. Let's start at the beginning. Can you tell us about your childhood, where you grew up, just some things about that? And then I always ask everybody on the show is, what's something that your parents instilled in you that you carry with you today for better or worse?
Hi, Rich. Thank you for inviting me to be a guest on The Hero's Journey. I'm excited to speak with you as well. So whenever I get asked about my childhood, it's always dilemma of, oh my goodness, I don't think we have time for all of that. So what is the short version? So I was born in Iowa, in Mason City, to my mom and dad, but my mother was part of a large family, all from Iowa, and my dad was part of a smaller community not too far away. He played professional baseball, and so that put us on the move when I was 2. And when he got out of that, we moved again to, we went to Florida, and then we went to Illinois, where he got into sales for a bit. I had an older brother, 15 months older, and then a younger brother came along when I was 5. And about that same time, my parents decided to sell everything we owned and joined a traveling ministry called Christ is the Answer, which is still intact today, from what I've read. And so we sold everything we owned and bought a motorhome and came to Nashville, where I actually live now, to join up with this traveling ministry. So 3 years of what felt probably about the same as joining the circus for a child. We traveled in big caravans down the highway and went to any town that would accept us with the big field and pitched a huge, huge tent and had revival every night. And when the time was up, might be a couple of weeks, then we'd move on to the next town. And that was my life from 5 to 8. So there's a good jumping off point. Oh, and you asked me the question, what are some of the things, or what's something that a lesson I took from childhood? I don't know when it started, but from an early age, I remember my mother instilling the belief in me that everything works for my good. And that probably has been one of the most important lifelines that I have held on to on the journey that unfolded as my life. So, everything works for my good has given me courage when things didn't feel like they were working for my good.
That's great, because I don't think, you hear that, but I don't know how many people actually instill that within themselves. Many feel that the world's against them, right?
Oh, and what a hard place to be, because if you feel that way, reality is reality. So we can either feel good about it or we can feel bad about it. And I would rather feel good about it. And I may not see the gift right now, and I may never see the gift, but I would sure rather believe there was one than just to think it was just random awfulness and didn't serve a purpose.
With what you went through, that we'll talk about here a little bit, but I can't see how, if you didn't have that belief, you would have made it through all that.
I don't think so.
So when you're doing all this traveling around, when your father's a baseball player and you're in the circus, as you said, did you feel different as a kid, or you were just around other kids and things that was their life too?
Yeah, at that time, that was their life too. So, we grew up just kind of normal until I was 5. And then we were in the ministry, and there were other kids in the ministry. It was just a really huge community of people, almost like I imagine a shared community would be. We didn't have much privacy that I recall. Someone was always in charge of watching the kids, and my father, developed into leadership in the ministry, so he was always busy, and that was just life as we knew it.
So when you're a kid, we all want to be something when we grow up. What did you want to be when you grew up? I know you wanted to be a solid gold dancer.
Yes, I get a lot of laughs when I share that how many of us.
Well, most people don't know what's.
Yeah, that tells my age, doesn't it? But I love their shiny costumes, and they were sleek, and their dancing. I really had, and I have. I don't show it too much anymore, but I really had talent for dancing, and I did take gymnastics for a bit. But my parents divorced. We left the ministry at 8 and divorced, and didn't have a lot of money to pursue things like dancing, or I did gymnastics up to the point it was time to compete, but we didn't have the money to compete, so I just quit. And I believe I had a good aptitude for that as well. The dreams quickly faded into money. It seemed like, because we were so poor, and I don't mean just poor, we were welfare, food stamp, government cheese poor. I believe money would solve all of our problems, and so any dream I had faded quickly, and the only dream I had was to find a way to make as much money as I could make.
Well, money does help, that's for sure. But I guess it's not the only thing.
No, I definitely learned that lesson. But sometimes you don't know until you know. And so, I spent quite a few years chasing, money and accomplishment in the business world, only to find, once I'd reached a pretty good definition of success for me, and still felt empty, that, oh shoot, money didn't fix it.
So when you were young, you had a pretty traumatic event that occurred that started this journey. Can you explain a little bit about what happened?
Sure. When I was 8, we had just left the ministry. My parents were having some marital difficulty and had separated, and they had recently gotten back together. And without going into a lot of the details, one night, which happened to be the night of an eye surgery that I had. So I was recovering from eye surgery and couldn't see well. It was like having Vaseline on my eyes. And in the middle of the night, the boogeyman appeared, only it wasn't in my imagination. It was real. There was a large lurking figure in my doorway, only I couldn't see it. I thought I was dreaming, but it felt pretty real. And I was attacked. I was sexually attacked by this man. It was not intercourse that I can recall. I lost all memory of this incident until I was in my 20s. And then with a lot of therapy, I've been able to recall more details. And I don't recall how it ended or getting away, but it was a terrifying experience. And I ran to my father's room, said, there's a man in my room. And he said, no, honey, it's just the anesthesia. Go back to bed. And he was loving and comforting and all, but I wasn't going back to my room. And eventually the gentleman came in and had a knife and struggled with my father a little bit. And so that was additionally terrifying. And I learned then, this is too big for me. And I vividly, though I couldn't remember any of the other details, I vividly remember like it was yesterday, my soul going up into the ceiling. I couldn't stay in that room. I couldn't stay in that body. And so I felt a piece of me separate and go up into the ceiling where I just watched things happen and anchored the idea that feelings will kill you. If I stay with this, I won't make it. And so that whole situation led to my parents getting a divorce and us, moving to stay with one of my mother's brothers in Oklahoma. I changed significantly. Life as a child for me was over. I got very depressed. I got very focused on my body, which ultimately developed into an eating disorder. I wanted to be small and invisible. I was extremely fearful. I remember constantly being afraid of being raped, not even knowing what had happened to me, which is really odd. But so I didn't know at 10 and 11 what had happened, but I was terrified of being raped in an abnormal way. And, that incident has continued on and off to generate a large amount of fear of additional attacks.
Now, did you have any other incidents that occurred?
I did. I joke when I'm speaking that I guess I am that person that's been struck by lightning 6 times because these things kept finding me, and it was uncanny the way that I would find these things. But I attended an author talk by Sally Field recently. She's launching a book memoir, In Pieces. And she said something that really, really hit home for me. What is fired together is wired together. And for her, it was love and violence. I think for me, it was possibly attention and danger, or, male attention and danger. When I was 15, there was another incident that involved a truckload of guys that I fought my way out of. And at 16, another incident with a friend's older brother that, legally, if I knew his name, I would love to charge him for what happened. And at 19, I walked into a drugstore robbery. I don't understand to this day how there were people up front talking, but when I walked back to the pharmacy, they were roughing up the pharmacist. There was two men with guns, and I walked right into it, and they grabbed me and put a gun to my head, and they were about finished. That's what's so puzzling. They were about finished. So I'm thinking, what are the people doing up front? Maybe they just didn't know what was going on. So the guy walked me to the front, and I'm a young, attractive girl, and I'm thinking I was just sure they're going to take me with them. But and walking with a gun to your head is terrifying. You think any minute now I'm going to trip and the gun's going to accidentally go off, or they're going to beat us or something. But they had everybody get down on the floor and close their eyes and threaten to shoot us if we lifted our heads. And they left. Eventually, we poked our head up, and that was the end of that situation. And there was one more that I remember. Oh, there was a couple of other incidences where I put myself in a bad situation, out drinking, and suddenly beyond where I should be drinking, and with predatory men. And then in my 40s, I was out watering plants or flowers, and a neighbor's loose Doberman and pit bull came up to me, which was pretty alarming. I tried to talk calmly to them, but they went after my cat, and I went after them, and I wasn't even thinking about my safety, but I ended up suffering a pretty severe attack from the pit bull. The Doberman just kind of backed off, and that he chewed all the way down and caused nerve damage on my wrist, and I had to have surgery and stuff. That attack felt like the epitome of all of them. Like that was the last straw for me. I didn't understand, even though it was a dog. It was a beast that represented every other beast I had encountered. I couldn't make them stop. I screamed, no one came. And I just didn't understand why this kept happening to me. But I also believe that we get the opportunity to repeat things that help us heal our wounds. I don't know why they happened to me, but I know that they did. And I know that I have been forced again and again to deal with those really hard things.
I'm sure you've asked yourself that question. Why me? Why do you think all these things happen to you?
There is no real explanation for it other than, I've read things that, even scriptural things that we're not given more than we can handle. If we're given things that feel like they're more than we can handle, we're going to be given a way out. What I make up today is that, I pursued a life of making as much money as I could make, to earn as much success, so external validation, as well as security. And then I scratched my head wondering why I still wasn't happy. I'm a national speaker and I talk to people and I have hope to give. I should have died in any of those incidences. The only way I got out of the pit bull attack was an elderly neighbor summoned every courage she had in her bones to somehow inch in behind me. I totally was like out of it. I had no memory of how, same thing that happens in other trauma. I could tell you with all those traumas, there's so much blank spots still. The issue with the guys in the truck, I don't remember getting there and I don't remember how it ended. And the thing with the dog, I had to have the lady tell me several times, now how did this end? And there was blood and I didn't know how much blood was mine and was my cat's, and he was on my wrist. So I'm thinking I'm dying. She jumped in because she felt the dog's going to kill me if she didn't intervene. The only thing that I can make up about all of this is now as a speaker, I'm here to share hope. And there's just so many things that I've had to walk through that if someone comes up to me afterwards and they say, this happened to me, then I can say, I'm really sorry. I understand that. I've walked through that myself. I've lost 4 children. I've had 4 miscarriages and was lucky to have the 5th, the one child that I do have. And so infertility is a huge struggle for women. And I know that pain firsthand. And divorce, we may get to that part of my story, but I lost the love of my life, only to luckily gain him back. But I've walked through the pain of divorce. And so all of these things have made me relatable to a lot of the population. That's just my journey, I suppose, is to have had walked through these hard things so that I can impart hope to other people who are following behind me in those certain specific traumas.
I do want to ask you one thing, especially with what happened with the recent appointment of the Supreme Court. Is it Kavanaugh? Was that his name? I don't follow the news, but stuff leaks through. With all this stuff going on, how prevalent is this?
It's so not talked about. I have not shared half of what I've just shared with you with anyone other than therapists and my husband. It's just not something talked about. There's so much guilt and shame attached to these things. Like, it is still so difficult for me to label the incident that happened to me at 8 as a sexual assault. If I didn't say this already, I don't have memory of it being intercourse, but it was still sexual in nature and it was violent. But it's difficult even now to say sexual assault because it just feels like, oh, that must be my fault. It is such a mind warping thing to have to embrace that I didn't deserve that at 8 years old. I didn't ask for it. I didn't do anything to put myself in. It just happened to me. I would say that it probably, there's so many women that came out of the closet with things like, yeah, that happened to me. That happened to me. Because we felt a little bit of an opening to say, yeah, me too. because we thought we were alone. And I think if nothing else, this whole thing in the media has helped the rest of us know there are so many of us who were victim of predatorial men. And even if we were drinking, we did not deserve to be manipulated or perpetrated.
I think it's important to remember that, even though we're humans and we think we're different, we still have some animal instincts within us that make an appearance, especially when there's intoxicants involved. What do you think could be done to change that? Or can it be? Is it just the way people are? Guys, I guess. Men.
Right. And I want to be fair to the genders, and there are a fair share of women who are predators as well. And it is not a men only thing. I just want to make that statement. Men take the rap, I think, for and maybe the majority is men, but women aren't completely innocent if we're looking at it on a gender basis. As far as what can be done, perhaps if there's just more talk about it, less secrecy. I love the saying, we're only as sick as our secrets. If we didn't feel so much shame about these things, if we were sure someone would believe us, perhaps we would be more open to share, but we would have to create a culture where victims are believed, where the lack of total memory is understood as normal and not questioned. Someone would really have to understand the neuroscience of trauma to be able to support women like myself that can't remember all the details. It's too, and even my situation at 8, how it was completely blocked from my memory until my 20s into a guided meditation. Then all of a sudden these memories start coming out. It was terrifying. And yet I suppose at that age, my mind or my spirit, whatever, decided it was time to let me know a few of these things, but not before.
I do want to, you brought up a good point about the talk and getting things out in the open, because I know you went through the 12-step program with your eating disorders. And, a big part of that program is getting the skeletons out of your closet. What was the greatest thing you took away from that experience as far as like the 12 steps?
I could not say enough great things about the 12-step program. When I was 17, I entered my first of 3 hospitalizations for anorexia and bulimia. And part of the recovery path was to take us to 12-step meetings. And so for eating disorders, there's a program called OA, or Overeaters Anonymous. The name is a little bit misleading. I think in the beginning it was more your typical compulsive overeater, and the anorexics and bulimics were in the minority, but that's definitely shifted. I could go to therapists, I could go to doctors, a lot of people who were very well educated on eating disorders, but the people that helped me the most were the ones who had walked it. Even if it was alcohol or drug addiction, addiction is a mental disorder. If we could snap out of it, we would, but we can't. And so it's helpful to talk to someone who understands the insanity of making a destructive decision again and again, when any sane person would look at you and say, you need to stop that. The 12-step program was great for 2 reasons. 1, being with people who had been where I had been or who were on that same journey. And 2, I've lost my drug. Binging and purging was my drug. It was my way of coping with feelings and life and the difficult things. And just, it was my way to anesthetize myself. I chose an eating disorder as opposed to alcohol and drugs. So when you get sober, you're stuck with a whole lot of feelings you're used to sedating. And so I could go to a meeting a day if I wanted to let some of that steam out in a healthy way by talking with people in a meeting, as opposed to using, whatever drug of choice. And for mine, it was an eating disorder.
I think you touched on it again. The important is you got to get it out. You just got to get it out. If you keep it inside you, it just festers. And, we don't fully understand our unconscious part of our brain or our subconscious, but that stuff's all going on in there still. It's just, you're not thinking about it. It's important to get it out.
It will come out. It will come out in a healthy way, or it will come out in an unhealthy way. It's coming out. So we get to choose which way we want to let it come out.
You're going through all this stuff happened, and you're still a young person in your 20s. Did you view the world as a bad place, or did the idea that everything happens for your good let you see the world differently?
I guess I feel like I have a split answer. I saw the world was whatever I could make it. I did not feel helpless. I felt in charge of my future. I was so determined and so driven to make my life the way I thought was going to be safe and secure. So in that way, the world was a great place. I did carry with me intense fear of being attacked. So anytime I moved, there would be a big adjustment period, listening to the new noises in the house and feeling terrified that there would be an intruder. As soon as I could, like my husband and I built our first home in our 20s, I had my first alarm system. And anytime I've had to move, there's this period of time usually where you don't have an alarm system. So there's also been periods where I've been too terrified to go out at night, and I had this belief that I was going to get attacked, and that has heightened and then lessened through various therapeutic type things. So sometimes there's relief from that, and other times there's not. I went to an intensive therapy treatment in early 2015. Because this had come up again, where I felt so terrified that I was going to be attacked in the middle of the night, and I had an alarm system, but in my mind, I just knew that there was some way they could still get in. Every window wasn't tapped, and I even envisioned them coming through the air conditioning ducts. I mean, at that point, you're not really thinking rationally. The therapist, there's a lot of psychodrama and experiential work that's very helpful with those types of traumas. And I'll never forget, we were going through it, kind of acting out. It gives you a chance to also scream if maybe you tried to scream but couldn't, or to fight back if perhaps you weren't able to fight back. And so we did a huge, intense psychodrama, over my intruder incident at 8, and then kind of talking about all of them. And I remember she took me to the door that led to the outside, and I felt my normal terror. And she said, "Angela, how many times, how old are you?" And I would have been maybe 46 or 7 at the time. "You're 47. How many times have you been attacked in the middle of the night?" And I said, "Once." And she goes, "Once. So you're 47 years old. You've been attacked once. Does that mean you were safe most of the time?" And I thought about it. I'm like, well, yes, I was. She said, "How many times have you been taken away with guys in a truck and held against your will? You're 47 years old. How many times did that happen?" I said, "Once." She goes, "So only one time in 47 years? And I said, "Yes." And she goes, "And how many times have you been attacked by a dog in 47 years? I said, "Once." So she said, so it's only happened to you. And so we went through this process with each of them. And I realized, oh my gosh, most of the time I'm safe. Most people are safe. And I've had a huge sense of relief ever since that time. And that's why I guess ongoing therapy crops up, the need for it, because we get new levels of healing. And it's been almost 4 years, and that has sustained me. The motto, most of the time I'm safe, most people are safe.
Do you ever get the feeling that you're going to be attacked still, or is that gone?
I mean, I am hyper aware. Anytime I leave a grocery store and go to my car, the minute I jump in my car, I hit the locks. It's a natural thing, but I don't walk in tremendous, limiting, debilitating fear as I have at certain times in my life. And at night, I am much more assured that most of the time I'm safe. I just woke up today and I've got a young son that sometimes comes in and doesn't lock the door. And I went downstairs and realized that the door was unlocked the whole night. And that's just further confirmation that, gosh, even with the doors unlocked, most of the time I'm safe.
You know, what's interesting, we're attracted to negative information, right? So the news, they all know that. They've known it for years. So it's the saying, if it bleeds, it leads. But you know what happens most days? Billions of people get along. That's what happens most days, right? I mean, most of the days, all 7 billion of us get along, at least tolerate each other, right? But that's not going to be on the news. That's not ever going to make it on the news. You were able to avoid the role of victim, or were you?
I definitely picked up my victim badges along the way and felt that everything I had walked through separated me from everyone else in a way that gave me this sense of entitlement. I felt I deserved extra sensitive treatment, for what I'd walked through, and extra special treatment. I sat in a therapist's office many times, but this particular therapist, I probably was, it's hard to remember. Like I said, I've spent my life in therapy, but I would say it was in my maybe late 30s. And he sat back in his chair, and I talk about this in the introduction of my book, because this was life-changing. I was talking who knows about what, and he sat back in his chair and he just looked at me and said, "Angela, your suffering is ordinary." Almost there was almost a tinge of like, "You're just so, don't be ridiculous." And I was so upset and angry, and I thought, how can you sit there and tell me my suffering is ordinary? Have you gone asleep? Do I need to recount all the things that I've walked through? Because I've got my list handy. I can recite all of that stuff to you. And that sat in, it really angered me, but it sat with me that my suffering is ordinary, that there's suffering all over the world, and there has been for centuries. Nothing is new. I joke when I give my talks and I talk about this, that, I paid him a lot of money. I guess I might as well buy his prescription for, how to think about that. And so I have embraced this notion that suffering is ordinary, because we have all suffered. Maybe not in the same ways, but we know people that have. It does no good to compare my suffering to your suffering. To each of us, it's the epitome of suffering. It's all we know. There are greater degrees and lesser degrees, but who cares? Pain is pain. And that has helped change my life. Now, that doesn't mean that I have perfect days and I don't fall back into victim thinking. I don't know if we'll get to it or not, but in my career, I encountered, some physical difficulties after changing jobs that ended up disabling me from corporate sales. And I have permanent impairment. I have ongoing limitations and ongoing physical therapy. And there are days where I feel like that's just really unfair. But I am so quick to remind myself, you know what, it could be so much worse. I mean, to look at me, you wouldn't know I had anything wrong. And for the most part, I can do a lot of things. And I'm so grateful that, what if it were my legs instead of upper body? I would have that much more limitation, So again, kind of like what we shared before, reality is reality. I can choose to think bad about it, or I can choose to think good about it. And it just feels a whole lot better to think good about it. There's days that I can't manage that. There's days where I get, I'm drowning in victim or negative thinking like everyone else. And I have to get myself back on track. And, my mind has gone awash, and I have to do the things I know to do to try to rein it back in and get back to seeing things in a better light.
Suffering is ordinary. The whole idea of Buddhism, that's the basis of Buddhism, that everybody suffers. Here's a way that you can not suffer. So I think, I think if you let go of that, and just say, okay, I'm not so different than all the other billions of people, either now, before me, or after me. It's almost like a relief, it kind of like, okay, I get it. This is just part of the game, right?
The same relief that comes when you go to a 12-step program and you hear other people telling your own story. It is amazing to me to go to a 12-step meeting and hear someone recount the same crazy behavior or the same desperate thoughts, the same things that it's like they're reading my journal. And that sense of, oh my gosh, I am not that different and I am not alone in this is huge relief.
Sure. Are you familiar with the Enneagram?
I have heard of it, but you mentioned that when we did our pre-interview, and I looked at the list of personality traits, and I know I've done all of these different ones, but I looked at those and I could not remember which one I ended up being.
It's a very powerful personality test, I guess you say, because you mentioned it. When you figure out what the Enneagram says is that basically all humans, all people, that there's 9 different types of personalities. Now there's some variations, but there's just 9. And when you discover what your type is, it's like you're reading your autobiography. And like you said in the 12-step courses. So when I figured out what my type was through the Enneagram, I'm like, okay, wow, there's billions of people just like me, pretty much. And there's billions before and after. So I'm not so different. My issues are ordinary.
Right.
My problems are ordinary. Everybody goes around with these insecurities, and some of us just hide it a lot better. It's part of the human condition.
There's one of the daily meditations in my book, and I won't be able to find it super fast, but I was on vacation in Mexico. And so my book, Finding the Gift, Daily Meditations for Mindfulness, came out of seeing lessons in nature. So on that particular day, I was on the beach out early doing some journaling, and I just noticed the grains of sand, and somehow that helped me, and the footprints in the sand. And I realized how old that sand was. You know what I mean? That those footprints just go on and on and on, back through the centuries. And the lesson for me was none of us are doing anything new. None of us are saying anything new. We're just a small, tiny piece of this huge picture. And yet we can make up that what we're going through is a really big deal. We can get this chip on our shoulder about whatever we've been allotted in this life that wasn't fair or whatever. It just doesn't do anybody any good. We're all the same.
That's true. So ego tells us we're different, right? That we're somehow special or separate from everything else.
Right.
What do you think your method to realize, at least see that? Ego's always there, but what would you recommend to someone, or how did you go about separating yourself from your ego?
Wow, that's an ongoing process. Do you mean yesterday or in general?
5 minutes ago.
5 minutes ago. When I get myself, I guess you train yourself to recognize when that thinking is happening. That's the first step. You're lost until you know you're lost, if that makes any sense. So when I feel the negativity brewing, and when I feel this self-pity stuff happening, that's the first clue. And then it's really, I journal a lot. I use the process of, being grateful and thinking about what I have to be grateful. I use that a lot. I mean, it's so cliche now to some people. I had a sponsor one time, I'd call her, this is in the book somewhere too. I think it's in the beginning, the G word. No matter what I was going through, I would call her and complain. Yeah, January 10th, the dreaded G word, gratitude. I'd call her and complain and tell her, can you believe this happened to me? And they did this and she said that. And she's like, write a gratitude list. And I'm like, yeah, but she said this. And she goes, stop, write a gratitude list. So I had mentors along the way, whether that was therapists or sponsors or coaches, reminding me and, take it back to gratitude, and quit whining. Just the first step, though, that's critical is knowing you're doing it.
Yeah, that's a good method. I've worked myself, and I've told people that, if you're in a difficult situation, just stop for a minute and like you did, write down 10 things that you're grateful about for this supposedly bad situation. And you're going to find them. It's just that our brains are not wired for happiness. It's wired to keep you alive. So we're attracted to negative information. So you have to realize that.
Right. But outside of that, stepping away from ego, it isn't just the victim thinking. It could be, thinking that I'm better than other people, or, pride, seeking approval. All of those things are ego-driven behaviors. And so, again, awareness is the first key. I can just feel myself when I'm operating that. And for me, meditation or mindfulness, like you said, just saying stop. I've got to come back. And, I don't want to let these outside things determine my worth. I came up with a phrase that really, really resonates with me, seeking tangible evidences of my worth. If I need you to tell me I'm okay, I'm in trouble. If I need this circumstance to work out for me to be okay, I'm in trouble. I have to be okay with me, and for me, it's with and with God. Otherwise, so that I can navigate all the rest of this stuff, but I can't be dependent on all of the rest of this stuff to prove I'm worthy or important or any of that other junk that bogs us down and distracts us from being, good, pure human beings that are inherently good and worthy.
Well, I want to get into your book, which I love, by the way. It's a great book. I've read a lot. I've read a lot of books, a lot of self-help. I don't even know if this is self-help. I guess it is. You classify it, but yours is awesome. I love it.
Oh, thank you, Rick.
I have to touch on something that puts you, again, here's ego, but this puts you in a small percentile of the population. Your first and your third husband. Can you talk about that?
Wow, that's almost like the childhood question. So, our love story is so full of synchronicity and just, amazingness. I had a crush on him when I was 13 years old, and we were in a church and he led worship, and he was 16 and all the girls had a crush on him, and he wasn't going to pay attention to a 13-year-old. And I would have been scared, I guess, if he had, knowing what we know now, a 16 and a 13-year-old. And as time went by, and when I was 16, I worked in a retail store in a mall, and he worked across from me. But 19, 16, he still didn't notice me. And then I used to love to go, dancing, Western dancing. And when I was 22, I was in this Western bar in Nashville. So everybody's in cowboy hats, flannel shirts, and cowboy boots. And in come this troop of the men in black. They were wearing suits, finely dressed, totally out of place. Anyway, they started hitting on me and my friends, and he was an undercover agent. So they were giving their undercover stories, their lies, their, just all of that stuff. I knew something was really wrong with this group of men, but I told the truth of where I worked. And so he hunted me down, and I gave him heck for about a year for lying. We went out, and it was just a meant to be thing. And we were married within 9 months, and I had a baby about 4 years after that. And the baby added to what was already going on. And that's two people coming from very dysfunctional backgrounds. He went through a whole lot as a child, and, in honor of his story, I won't tell it, but he went through a whole lot. And we came together, and even before we got married, we were starting to see some of the dynamics playing out. And we did premarital counseling that basically never ended. We did the premarital counseling, we got married, and we just continued in counseling, thinking that love would be enough to overcome all of the different dysfunction we brought to the relationship. But in the 7th year, we ended up divorcing. Just couldn't navigate the problems that we were dealing with. Having a child, I think, made it difficult because he was always gone as an undercover agent. So a lot of times I felt like a single mom, and I felt, I was working full time as well. We just grew distant and very disgruntled with one another. And so it devastated me, though, to become a single mom. That was one of the things outside of getting money was you stay married. You don't divorce. You don't put children through that. And so I was, doing what I said I would never do, and divorcing with a young child. Our son was 2 when we separated, and about 3 when we divorced. I felt like damaged goods at that point, and I'm sure all the trauma that I had been through added to that. But here I am, thinking now I'm a woman with a baby. Who's going to want me now? And I married the next nice guy that came along. He worked with my company and it was just nice and made me laugh. And, my number one love of my life was gone. And this guy seemed like a pretty good second. We really didn't need to be together. And my husband also married somebody, and that turned out to be, not good. And when they were both failing at the same time, within just a year or two, I thought to myself, well, that's kind of interesting. But I was committed. I did not want a divorce. My son really liked this guy, but circumstances, continued that necessitated divorce. So Patrick, my first and third husband, current husband, was ready to give us a try again. And I'm like, there is no trying. We already know what we have. I'm not doing this again. So you need to make a decision if you're ready to do it or not do it. And he thought about it for a couple of weeks and he decided to do it. So, we got back together and we've been back together, 15 years. We count the whole thing. We celebrated 26 years of our wedding anniversary, and we just discount the little hiccup in the middle.
That's awesome. That's a great story. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not easy. I mean, he is the love of my life. I have no doubt he is the man for me. I am the woman for him. We go together. The dysfunction that we both endured, we constantly bring those things up in each other. But I think that's the gift of life, is we get the chance to heal in the same way that we were wounded. The same therapist who I talk about so much was so significant in my life. He said, we were wounded in relationships and we heal in relationships. We don't heal by just abstaining from participating, say, in a love relationship. We can work on ourselves all day long, but until we get back in the trenches, we can't grow. We can't put that knowledge into practice. And so, it has not been easy these last, the second go round, but we are committed to working through whatever comes up and continuing. I'm always going to be on the journey of becoming a better person. I mean, I'm not the saint. I might look like on social media, everybody thinks I have the perfect life. I mean, I can be difficult too. So we work it out. Thank goodness we have love as the foundation to keep working on it.
Right. Well, that's important. You're always going to have issues. If you get two people in a room together, eventually they're going to have issues, of some kind.
Right. Right.
So you just work through it. Right. You're committed to your marriage, and you just work through it.
Well, I joke a lot that I've been married to Mr. Right, Mr. Wrong, and Mr. Right at the wrong time.
That's awesome.
It's just kind of a joke. I can't say that I married Patrick at Mr. Right at the wrong time, but it wasn't I wasn't where I needed to be, and he wasn't where he needed to be for the marriage to last. It was devastating, but we had to learn lessons in those middle marriages that we brought back when we remarried. And those middle marriages really helped us see at a deeper level some of the issues. In his, for instance, he had to become the communicator. I remember him coming to me and saying, wow, now I know what you went through when I wouldn't communicate with you. It flipped, and I had to be the one trying to initiate communication. It's difficult when the other person is non-responsive. And I thought, yes, it is. So, and then I saw some of my own defects of character in the middle marriage that were similar to what I did in the first marriage. And I knew that that's on me. And those are the things I've got to work on and change, or I'm going to create the same problem. So the middle marriages were really, really helpful. I don't recommend it. I recommend trying to stay together with the first one. But that was just our journey.
So let's get back to your great book, Finding the Gift. What prompted you to write it? I know it was a process. And who is this book for?
I wrote this book for me. And let me back up even before that. I didn't intend to write a book. I was going through, 2003 would have been the ending of my middle marriage. And it ended in a very painful way. It wasn't what I wanted. And I remember going on a hike and seeing these 3 trees, and we've got a lot of tornadoes in Tennessee. So a lot of tree damage is just common when you walk through some of the state parks. And I saw these 3 trees, and this one in the middle had a hole, like a huge hole, clean through the middle of it. You could wave at somebody on the other side. And I'm walking and hiking, but I just kind of have that thought, wow, that's a dead tree. And I look up and I see this huge tree. Nothing's wrong with it past the hole. It's got branches. It's beautiful green leaves. It's the tallest of the 3. And that was the first of the many metaphors to come that I ended up starting to write down in journals, which ended up becoming this book. But from that tree, I had to sit down, and I always hike with a backpack and a journal because I get inspired to write when I'm in nature. And that tree taught me, it reinforced that no matter what happens at a foundational level, with enough hope, help, and healing, we can grow right past it. And, from the sky, that tree looked exactly the same as all the other trees. There was nothing wrong with it. So I wrote a poem about that, which is at the front of the book. And then for the next year or so, nothing else happened. But then the physical challenges that I faced on the job began. And so life was crumbling around me. I had such debilitating pain and limitation. And yet at the same time, I started seeing these encouraging metaphors in, nature, in my pets. They would teach me a lesson, or trash on the street. And at first it was a little uncanny. I thought, does everyone else look at, a sink and get a metaphor for life? And I'm thinking, I guess not. Maybe I'm supposed to write these down, and I want to remember these. They seem like such solid nuggets for how to live a life. And so I started writing them down, and over the next 8 years, I had filled up 3 handwritten journals. And it had become evident to me at that point. I felt, spiritually guided that, these are for you, but you also have to share these. And I put up a lot of resistance because, I didn't write these thinking other people were going to read them. I wrote them just to capture them for me. And I'm like, who's going to read my silly little journaling? But I decided, okay, I love daily meditation books. I have grown up on them in the recovery world. Every 12-step organization has their own set of daily readers. And I thought, it's going to be a gift to myself. I'm going to print this and put it in one bound copy instead of all the handwritten, scribbled through journals that I had. And if anyone else buys it, fine. But I'm doing this for me.
Where did all these things come from? Did it come from you, or did it come from somewhere else, these things you wrote down?
It definitely didn't come from me. I try to humbly say as much as I can, I am the scribe. I am the willing participant who was, willing to receive these, to let my eyes see these. And there were years, it doesn't take 8 years to write a 365-page daily meditation book. You could theoretically write one a day and have it done in a year. So the reason it took 8 years is because there were days, weeks, months, and even years where I didn't write anything. And I have found that when I am looking for a gift in a day, and when I say gift, just, 2 days ago, I took a walk, and this was the gift. But our eyes have to be open. We have to have our feet in the present, and our mind has to be with, and spirit have to be with our feet. That's kind of my simple way to describe mindfulness. Your mind is where your feet are. And so I'm taking a walk, and I see this birch tree that's been just cut almost in half. There was probably 6 feet left of it in a massive tree trimming that happened, from the electric company or the phone company or some utility company. And I was shocked to see this tiny little branch growing out of the top of the tree already. It's been about 2 months maybe, with green leaves on it. And there again, another lesson. It doesn't matter what devastating blow we are dealt. If we don't give up, if we keep leaning toward the light, if we keep allowing the nourishment to come in, we're going to come back. And so that is the nature of how all these things happen. But yes, I had my eyes opened, but I didn't think those things up. It's almost like they were illuminated, for me. And of course, I believe that was God giving me exactly what I need, all this reassurance that I need. But then, I write it down, and then my journey of personal development over the years helps me interpret those things that I see. And that's just how the book came to be.
Well, I think it's important to remember that masterpieces take a while. Wagner spent 40 years writing his trilogy. So 8 years to write a book, I think that means it's a pretty good book.
Well, I got to I think it was the end of 2011. And so I started the book in 2005, and I'm thinking, this is so funny. When you think about things, sometimes the brain tricks us into thinking we're actually accomplishing something. But thinking and doing are two different things. And so I remember thinking, I've been working on this book a long time. I'm going to count up how many I have. And I counted, and I was dismayed to find I only had 57. I'm like, but I've been working on this book for 5 or 6 years. How do I only have 57? Well, there were times where I wasn't looking, and I wasn't tuned in to the lessons that I'm sure were there just the same as all the other times when I was looking. And so I set out, I'm like, well, there's 365 days in 2012. I could write every day. And of course, life still happened, but I finished the book in August of 2013. And then came the next journey of getting it all dictated. Everything was handwritten in journals. But yeah, it's a tricky process writing a book. There's a lot of our own resistance. We get in our own way.
Did you ever read the book, The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield at all?
Ooh, no, let me write that down. That sounds wonderful. I'm reading Art and Fear right now, which is fabulous.
Yeah, you'll love Stephen Pressfield's book, The War of Art.
War of Art.
Yeah, he talks about this, the creative process, this resistance that we all feel, and the difficulties. It's kind of like the Zen saying, the obstacle, or not even Zen. I guess it is Zen, also Stoicism. The obstacle is the way, so the resistance is the way, right? So. You'll love it. It's a great book. You'll love it. As an artist, I want to touch on that a little bit. I want to be respectful of your time, but you're also an artist. You do abstract painting.
I do. Yes. That's some crazy thing that I had wanted to paint for probably 20 or 30 years. And occasionally I would buy a brush, or I'd buy a small canvas. I've collected how-to paint books that go into the closet or the drawer for someday. And the notion was, you don't know, you can't even draw. So I don't know why you think you can paint. You've never been trained to paint, just that's dumb. It's a waste of money, a waste of time. But I kept having this nagging feeling that I wanted to paint. And so finally in the spring of 2014, I approached a good friend who is an instructor as well as a very accomplished portrait artist, painter. And I said, can I just come to one of your classes? I mean, I don't even barely know how to open the tube of paint. Show me how to open, show me how to mix, just show me some tricks, And so but actually it took me 6 months to have that conversation, then actually show up to her class. There was just this huge fear and resistance and doubt, but I enjoyed it. And we quickly realized I didn't want to do, what she does. I wanted to do abstract. And so she put me in touch with my present mentor, who's in her 80s, and she's been painting, and she's very successful. And I just started painting, and the way that has unfolded could only be accredited to God and synchronicity, a higher plan, because it sure wasn't my plan. Coming up on my book launch, which was in November 2015. At a coffee shop, I had this crazy notion to bring paintings, not just 1 or 2, but 8. Bring all the paintings that I'd been working on. And it was a little bit embarrassing, I'm going to bare my soul in this book. If that wasn't vulnerable enough, I'm going to bring these paintings of abstract art. And, but I was driven, and I set them all aside around, the reception. And at the end, the coffee shop owner came up to me and said, we'd like to keep your paintings if you're interested. And I'm like, what for? She goes, well, to put them on the wall. I'm like, well, people will see them. And they just laughed. They laughed like you laughed, like everyone's laughed. And she goes, well, that's kind of the point. They may actually want to buy them if you're open to that. And I said, well, they're not even set up to hang. I don't have any hanging hardware. She said, that's okay. We can prop them up till you can come back. And I'm thinking I'm out of excuses. So I said, okay. And that led to an exhibit at the local library. It led to a really large commission and a couple of other sales. And then I had a speaking engagement for an art society in an art gallery. And I had the same nudge. I'm going to take maybe 2 or 3 paintings. Just, I'm talking to painters and artists. That way they can we'll relate on that level. And I did my talk, and the gallery owners came up afterward and said, we really love, several of these pieces. Would you be open to letting us represent you? And I'm just scratching my head thinking, do these people not know that I don't know how to paint? But sure, and that was a couple of years ago. It's been crazy, just the experience of being able to have gallery representation as a brand new artist. And sometimes I think I should keep that secret, but it's my story. And if someone doesn't want art from a brand new artist, then they're not my people. So, but I love it. It started as a way to express myself. Abstract art is different from representational art because, you sit down to paint a bowl of cherries. You kind of know that what you're going to end up with is a bowl of cherries. Now it'll have, my bowl of cherries might be different than somebody else's, but it's going to be a bowl of cherries if with any luck. And with abstract, I've set out all the colors and just let my body kind of take over, let my spirit take over, and just keep slapping it on and rearranging. And I love it. The deeper it can get, the grunge and the texture. I love to build up texture. And you're just looking for happy accidents until it starts having some sort of feeling. And it is frustrating as heck because I like to be able to do 1, 2, 3 and be done. And so it's a challenge for me to set that aside and stop thinking and just be. So it's a very mindfulness practice where I totally lose myself in it. I love doing it.
Do you feel like you lose a sense of self when you're deep into your work?
If that's a good thing, then yes. I mean, I totally can lose track of time. Like I'm not thinking, I'm not worrying about anything else in life. I am captivated by creation. I am amazed by the little accidental surprises that happen with, oops, I didn't mean to do that, but oh wow, that's really cool. Save that part, and just I love being surprised because in the way that I grew up, my response to all the trauma was to control things down to the nth degree, and I've driven people close to me crazy by being so controlling, and that's something I always have to work on. And in abstract paint, you can't control it. You just have to let it go and let it happen. And I'm fascinated by that challenge to show up and let it surprise me.
Your metaphor, you're talking about your art is a perfect metaphor for life. I'm serious.
Oh, yes, exactly. Right. I mean, just think of all the things that have happened in our lives that were not what we were going for, not what we expected, and yet they turned out to be beautiful surprises.
Gifts,
exactly. Far better than anything we could have planned.
It makes me, there's the whole idea, do we actually have free will? I would say we don't. You call it a plan, call it whatever, but I think you just have to learn to let go more. Just let things evolve, as they're going to evolve.
I have to stamp that on my forehead. That's definitely up there in one of my top 5 continuing lessons is learning to trust and let go. I mean, it was ingrained in me that you cannot trust. And if you want something done, you have to do it yourself. And so the letting go is a huge lesson to get. If we could let go, would there be any more worry ever? I don't think there would be.
Well, you'd have to, deal with attachments, but if you let go, there's no attachments. Yeah, there'd be no worry.
Well, it's a beautiful thought. I'll keep working on it.
Me too. Every day. Angela, I could do an entire series with you, but I want to be respectful of your time. If people want to find your book, find out more about you, find your art, where can they go?
The best place to go is my website. It's angelahowell.com, ANGELAHOWELL.com. And there are tabs for speaking, for coaching, for the book, for the art. One of the first things I did when my arms quit working the way they're supposed to work was photography. And I was still able to hold a camera and do things like that. So there's actually even a tab for photography, which shows some of the things that I was doing in that vein. I don't do as much of that anymore since I started painting. But yeah, and so there's links to find the book. There's a book trailer. And I'm thankful to say that it surprised me it has done really well and resonated with a lot of people, and it's just done really well. And I've had people request a hardcover because, they're like me, they'll read it over and over and over because, once, and then 365 days later, you forgot what that one said. So, you can just keep going through it. So I had requests for a hardcover edition, which I launched last year. So there's a gift edition hardcover as well as the paperback. There's the Kindle. And then I am aspiring to do an Audible type version as well.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. Like I said, I could do an entire series with you.
Thank you. I could talk to you forever too. It seems like you're very easy and fun to talk to, and I appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you. And I look forward to more of your work.
Thank you, Rich.
Thank you again for listening. And please leave any comments or suggestions. We're always looking for ways to improve our show and make it the best show it can possibly be. Visit mindfulaccord.com, where you can find additional episodes and you can follow our blog. We give some helpful information on mindfulness, meditation, and just ways to manage our everyday stressful lives. And most importantly, if you know of a friend or a family member that would benefit from this story, please share it with them. Until next time, I'm Rich Decker.